Hi, I'm Tom Lombardo, and I'm the director of the Center for Future Consciousness and the Wisdom page. I'm also the editor of the online journal Wisdom in the Future. Here's images of my books that I have written on consciousness, the future, psychology, wisdom, and related topics. Most of the books you can find up on my website. Presently, I'm working on a series of books dealing with the evolution of science fiction. And if you come this afternoon to the presentation I'm doing over at the Graduate Institute, I'm going to talk about that book over there, and an introduction of it.
Also, you have books in the back.
Yes.
And anyone else here who has a book they want to share and sell, you can put it in the back. It's a space that's set up specifically for that.
But today I'm going to, but today I'm going to talk about my book that will be coming out in the fall, Future Consciousness, The Path to Purposeful Evolution, and in a half an hour I'm going to summarize for you an 800-page book. It hit me as I was listening to the first presentation that my presentation is going to be philosophically very, very different. In fact, I would say somewhat at odds with the perspective of reality that was presented. A quick way to summarize my book is a theory of human consciousness within the cosmos that provides a philosophy of life. My book starts with a simple question. What is a good future and how do we create it? I take this to be the fundamental challenge of human life. It's the challenge we wake up to every day. Small issues, big issues, our whole life, whether what career I'm pursuing, what I want to eat for breakfast. This is the thing that engages the human mind more than anything else. It's also the central question that motivates the study of the future. Futurists are concerned with trying to figure out how to create the best possible future. All of their efforts are in that direction. But the question is very interesting because the question reflects our most distinctive and empowering capacity. That is, the fact that we can ask the question and it makes sense to us says something very fundamental about what we are. And what we are is that we're all futurists. The answer I give to the question is that flourishing in the flow of purposeful evolution is the good future, and wisdom or heightened future consciousness, and I equate the two together, is the means to realize the good future. My starting point in answering and explaining what I mean by my hypothesis is to turn to the question of a simple one. What is reality? It turns out that all theories of the future, all theories of the good, and all theories of the human mind assume theories of reality. And what I'm going to present is a theory of reality that is both informed by contemporary thought and has a global perspective to it, that is, reflects both Eastern and Western thinking. And it's going to consist of two ideas, evolution and reciprocity. The idea of evolution I work out at length in my book, The Future of Science, Technology, and the Cosmos, and a great deal of my thinking on global consciousness comes from Richard Nesbitt's Geography of Thought, How Westerners and Asians Think Differently and Why. I'm going to begin with evolution and the evolution of evolution. Almost all ancient classical theories of reality assumed that ultimate reality was eternal, changeless, unified, and when we come into the modern era with Isaac Newton in the beginning of modern science, it was some kind of clockwork regular mechanism. But the last 200 years have revealed that reality is actually much different. It's evolutionary. It's future directional. It's quasi-chaotic. It's creative. And it's self-transcending. The grand cosmic narrative that has emerged in the 20th and 21st centuries is that we live in an evolutionary reality. And that provides a narrative of our past, present, and future. But to make things even a little more interesting, it looks like the process of evolution is accelerating. So this graph here shows a decreasing period of time between each successive significant event in evolution. So significant jumps and transformations are occurring logarithmically faster and faster. As Walter Trude Anderson said, evolution isn't what it used to be. And what he was getting at in that book is that the accelerated process of evolution is occurring because the process of evolution itself is evolving. And that means to say that the means by which things evolve keeps building on itself with additional factors of transformation coming into play. So evolution is evolving. Now, if I turn to humans, I'm going to suggest that humans are a critical element in this. And the title of this slide is Purposeful Human Evolution, with a quote from Julian Huxley, that we are nothing else, which is a big deal, than evolution become conscious of itself. Humanity at all different levels of analysis shows an evolutionary history, whether it's technological, psychological, biological, sociological. We are manifesting evolution in all the different aspects of human reality, including our individual consciousness. I'll throw out the hypothesis for you right now, which I will develop later on, is that right now the conscious flow, the individual stream of consciousness, or fountain of consciousness, if we use that metaphor, in our minds is an evolutionary process that's ongoing. That is, our minds are in evolution. We engage, in fact, in an evolution in evolution. That is, we have added something in to the cosmic evolutionary process that speeds up the process of evolution. And what we have added in is that we have a capacity for informing ourselves of information, ideas about reality. We think about it, we come up with ethical principles, and we are purposeful. That is, our individual consciousness and a collective consciousness shows a directional, purposeful flow. That is, we intentionally guide evolution, both within ourselves and in the world around us. And this is a unique expression of the cosmic process of evolution of evolution. We are an evolution of evolution in that we are thoughtfully, purposefully, intelligently, and ethically attempting to guide evolution. And humans throughout history have engaged in numerous experiments with the effort to purposefully guide evolution. That is, all our efforts to improve ourselves, improve reality, are really experiments, sometimes they fail, sometimes they don't, in purposeful evolution. There's the expression playing God. We shouldn't mess with Mother Nature. We shouldn't mess with ourselves. We shouldn't attempt to manipulate nature's plan. But that's in fact exactly what we do. That's exactly what's distinct about us. And our fundamental moral imperative, as for example outlined in Carter Phipps's book Evolutionaries, is that we should play God. That's exactly what the good is, to thoughtfully, ethically manipulate ourselves and nature. The second idea, inspired at least by me, comes out of the East, and that's reciprocity. Beginning with the Eastern notion of the yin-yang, that reality is distinct but interdependent complements. In the West, we find this idea showing up in systems theory, where even though we have a set of individuals existing in the world, these individuals maintain their individuality through exchange. That is, I am unique because I interact with you. The third idea comes out of my book, The Reciprocity of Perceiver and Environment, that is, humans in their environment form an interdependency. We are distinct from our environment, but we are interdependent with it. Each of us is a distinct individual, but we're interdependent with the collective, with society. And although we can't say that we are distinct from our machines, we are interdependent with them, and we in fact are all cyborgs. And we have been cyborgs for a couple million years already. Consciousness in the physical world has been one of the big philosophical problems down through history, East and West. And what I would suggest is that our self-conscious minds and the physical world that we talk about form a fundamental reciprocity. You can't reduce either to the other one. That is, for things are things because of mind, as mind is mind because of things. So if you're familiar with philosophical theories of reality and the mind, this is a rejection of both idealism, materialism, and dualism. Consciousness and the physical world are interdependent with each other, and one cannot exist without the other. So when people ask me what I am, I say I'm an evolutionary Taoist. And one day, in a moment of kind of cosmic inspiration, I created an image that went along with my philosophical point of view. And afterwards I could explain it to you. That's also my image of time. And what we see in reality is reciprocal evolution. We see things evolving together, interdependently. So, what is reality? To quote very succinctly, Teilhard de Chardin, what?
I'm very sorry. We think we have urban now.
Okay, well this is a good place to stop. Hold on one second.
But we definitely will.
Okay, all right, hold on one second. Okay, we are moving. That's the sum. Now I could stop right now,
Yeah,
and you could try Irwin.
We can't get him on now.
Okay, all right, I will stop at this point. Okay, and I'll be back. Okay. Okay, so I had just left off with what is reality? We are moving. Maybe I'll get a couple little comments in. Now let me turn to the question of what is the good, given I presented an idea regarding what is reality. And my answer was that flourishing in the flow of purposeful evolution for humans is the good. Throughout history, there's been a multitudinous of theories of the good, both Eastern and Western, but in looking at all of them, it always hits me that underneath there's always some idea regarding what reality is, which informs the philosophers and spiritualists regarding what indeed is going to be the good. And so the theory I present regarding the good to flourish in the flow of purposeful evolution is based on the theory of reality that I just laid out, that it's interactive, holistic, and evolutionary and dynamic. That's the reality we're in. And we are purposively manipulating and controlling it and evolving it. Flourish out of the dictionary means to grow well and luxuriantly with abundance, to do well, to prosper, to thrive, to be highly productive. Three key themes in it are positive direction, efflorescence, and vitality. And looking at different ideas of flourishing in ecological science and psychology, in particular positive psychology, this at least is my evolving list at this point in time as to the qualities of flourishing. And you have an outline, so I'm not going to read them off, but in fact, this derives off of a variety of different sources, and these are the standards of what is the good both for ourselves individually, for ourselves collectively, and it defines what we mean or what we should be pursuing in terms of well-being and good. Now, why do I think flourishing in the flow of purposeful evolution is the good? Because it aligns with a holistic and evolutionary reality of humans and nature. First thing I'll say that is very oppositional to contemporary thinking is the whole notion of sustainability is off target. We shouldn't be striving for sustainability. We should be striving for flourishing. And I can go into the details of that, but sustainability is not resonant with the nature of human and natural reality, because human and natural reality is transformative. We can't sustain. We have to grow, evolve, develop. And flourishing fits better than sustainability. Secondly, flourishing is inspirational. It hits the romantic side to us. It has an aesthetic resonance to it. It has a connotation of vitality, of living. It feels good to feel like you're flourishing. It's something that would inspire people. Thirdly, it applies to all dimensions of reality. We can talk about flourishing individuals, flourishing societies, flourishing technology, flourishing ecologies. When people have identified happiness, both Eastern and Western, as the ultimate good, when you look at the descriptions of happiness, they align up with what contemporary people mean by flourishing. And in fact, happiness, authentic, deep happiness, is simply the experience of flourishing. And finally, whatever the good is, the good has to be achievement of excellence in our most distinctive capacity, which is purposeful evolution. So the thing that we do that's unique to us and most empowering will, in its most excellent form, be the good for humans, and that's what flourishing is. Now, how do we flourish? What facilitates flourishing and excellence and purposeful evolution? And I'm going to say virtue. And virtues are actively accomplished realizations of excellence. And I take that both from Aristotle and from Confucius. And in particular, the character virtues of heightened future consciousness are what facilitate purposeful evolution and flourishing. So what's future consciousness? Because that's the title of my book. Future consciousness is the total integrative set of psychological processes and modes of experience and behavior that we all possess that are involved in our consciousness of the future. It includes our hopes, dreams, and fears, our plans and goals, our visions of the future, our theories, the stories we tell, all of our purposeful behavior. It is the total gestalt that we all have of our awareness, understanding, and engagement with the future. And that is the critical, fundamental, most empowering aspect of the human mind. Number one, consciousness is future directional. That is, consciousness flows continuously into the future. We all possess it, we all experience the psychological arrow of time. But this psychological arrow of time, given the way they're constructed, is always contextualized in terms of our memories and our anticipations and our goals. A second controversial point I'll throw out is that there's no such thing as a pure present. No one could ever experience a pure present, because the present is always contextualized by the past and the future. Our actions are almost always purposeful, except for random reflexes, and even they are not quite non-purposeful. Consciousness is constantly purposeful. We're thinking toward ends. And in fact, if you were to imagine a human being who did not possess future consciousness in its fundamental operational form, they would not seem intelligent or human at all. They would seem at best reactive, entirely reactive. That is, our whole intelligence revolves around a focus and movement and manipulation toward achievement of goals and the realization of plans in the future. And all of our psychological dimensions are involved in it. In fact, I'll suggest that this whole thing we're in right now, human civilization, is entirely a creation of future consciousness. This is what built everything we have. The capacity to set goals, to think out strategies, to make plans, to orchestrate an evolution of our reality, and this all around us, including all of our technology, is a creation of future consciousness. Future consciousness guides our purposeful evolution, both historically and individually. We're all using it right now as a means to continually evolve ourselves and to guide our consciousness. Now, I said that virtues were the key, and this is my list of what I take to be the fundamental virtues of heightened future consciousness. Because even though we all possess future consciousness, we possess it to various degrees with various strengths, various weaknesses involved, and we could all enhance our capacity of future consciousness along multiple dimensions, and they're all virtues. And you have the list in front of you, so I'm not going to go reading the whole thing through. But I will highlight a few items. As I mentioned, the fundamental human reciprocity is the conscious self and the world, and I want to say something on each side of that one. On the side of the self, the idea I would propose to you that humans are self-creative within the world and regarding the future. That is, we are all creating ourselves and creating our lives. We are literally beings that are able to pull ourselves up by our own bootstraps and create our sense of existence. And self-responsibility is acknowledging and cultivating our own self-creativity, self-control, and self-determination of the future. And self-responsibility is the cardinal virtue, because all virtues are accomplishments based upon the idea that I can improve myself, and therefore that assumes the notion of self-responsibility. So all virtues are self-determined, self-responsible accomplishments, and until you have a sense of self-responsibility, you can't develop any virtues, whatever they happen to be. And if people do not have a sense of self-responsibility with respect to their own future, they feel disempowered and they feel depressed. Those are common effects produced by someone who doesn't feel in control of what's going on in their lives or where things are going tomorrow. Willpower, which is another name for self-control and self-creativity, is an example of, from the book by Roy Baumeister, an example of how one would go about developing a virtue, in this case here, self-responsibility and self-control, and it turns out this virtue can be developed through a whole variety of different practices. Now let's flip it over, and instead of talking about the self, talk about the ecology of future consciousness. Each of us, each self, exists in an active engagement within an ambient evolutionary reality. That's where we're all in right now. The surrounding ambient reality, our ecology, is in a state of evolution and transformation, and we're all in it. And we're all responsible, both psychologically and ethically, for what's happening around us, because our very nature is to control and manipulate reality, including ourselves. We're responsible for it. And in fact, when people talk about the environment and the environment made me do something, the environment never makes us do anything. It depends on how we interpret it and how we react to it. That is, psychologically, that environment out there, to some degree, is always being created by us, by our minds, by our interpretations, by our actions. The two key virtues in heightened future consciousness that definitely apply to our understanding of the environment is having a broad perspective on time and a broad perspective on the cosmos. And so when I say future consciousness is critical, I do not mean to ignore or to minimize historical consciousness, because it's through historical consciousness that we get a sense of the future. That is, the opposite of living in the future or focusing on the future is not historical consciousness, but the more limited primordial experience of relatively living in the here and now. So when people talk about living in the here and now, that's a primordial state of the mind. Our social reality is created through our social virtues. We have better or worse social realities depending on that. Our technology should be guided by wisdom. That is, we should be wise cyborgs. Right now we seem to be very foolish cyborgs. That is, we're not using technology that well. And I would suggest at the level of the cosmos and nature, our primary responsibility here is to participate in the evolving nature of the Earth and the universe, and that we should do so in an informed and ethical fashion. My time person disappeared, so I have no notion of how much time I have left.
You've been talking 12 minutes.
More.
More.
So I have 6 minutes left. Okay. What I'm going to do...
Let's do that.
Okay, what I'm going to do is I'm going to skip these 2 slides, so I finish on time. You have them on your... I'll just add one little point on this last slide here. The future is the ongoing act of creation, and we are all participating in it. I totally, completely disagree with Erwin Laszlo. The universe is not being guided by a transcendent set of laws or intelligence or form. That's pure Plato, all the way. The universe is creating itself, and we are part of it, and the future exists because it's still in a state of being formed. We are in an unsettled reality, and part of that unsettledness is that this reality, in part at least, is chaotic and random. And in fact, that's the juice that keeps the thing going. If it was entirely orderly and coherent, this would be a frozen movie. Okay. The self. The human self, although it gets a lot of bad press from the East and people who are sympathetic with the East, is at this point in time a very primitive and fragmented reality. It's not like we need to transcend ourselves. We need to evolve the self much further. The self right now is only marginally, the human self, only marginally developed. And all through history, there have been numerous efforts to try to evolve the self. And if you look at them, you'll always see that they turn out to be efforts for how to purposefully evolve ourselves. Humans have a resonance with stories and narratives. And in fact, it is through stories and narratives that we evolve ourselves. We tell stories about ourselves to ourselves. We create personal narratives, and those personal narratives that we keep creating is the means by which we are evolving ourselves through our lives. What kind of a person am I? What happened in my life? Why did this go right? Why did that go wrong? We also create grand narratives, which are stories we tell ourselves about the world at large. And we often connect the two together. And it seems as if the best way to develop virtues and wisdom as a whole is to create a wisdom narrative based on the virtues of wisdom and then attempt to live by it. So the pathway to wisdom and evolving oneself is to create an ideal personal narrative based on the pursuit of wisdom and virtue, and that indeed will lead to greater and greater levels of wisdom. Now, I said that wisdom is equivalent to heightened future consciousness, and heightened future consciousness is a set of character virtues, and so wisdom is the synthesis of the character virtues of heightened future consciousness. Now, that's an odd definition of wisdom. But in fact, we've been undergoing a wisdom renaissance over the last, 20, 30 years. A lot of new research going on, and there's a great tradition in the past regarding what wisdom is. And when you distill it all down, this is the definition I come up with of wisdom, is personally internalized, continually evolving. There's no endpoint to wisdom. Understanding and fascination with the big picture and personal dimensions of life and what is good, and the desire and creative capacity to apply this understanding to enhance evolve, the well-being of life both of oneself and for others. And that definition resonates in with Eastern thinkers and Western thinkers, and notice it points toward the future. When someone has wisdom, that means they can use their knowledge to make life better, and that's out there ahead of them. They can create positive consequences. So I would suggest that wisdom should be thought of as having a future focus, it should be thought of as evolutionary, and it should be thought of as holistic, and believe those who are seeking the truth, but always doubt those who find it. And wisdom is an ideal. So what people thought 1,000, 2,000 years ago about wisdom isn't the end of the story. We keep developing our very notion of what wisdom is. Wisdom is an ongoing epistemic ideal that we are working on. It's a holistic capacity integrating together the character virtues. It has an ethical dimension. That is, we create preferable futures through future consciousness and wisdom, and wisdom is the highest expression of future consciousness, and it's our most distinctive, empowering human capacity. And it best facilitates purposeful evolution. So if someone asks, how are we going to create a better world tomorrow? My answer is going to be, we're going to have to develop wisdom. That's what we're missing. Not gadgets, not this, not that, but wisdom. It's our guiding light in that it's the key to happiness, the good life, and flourishing. And that, on that point, lots of people in the past as well as the present have said the same thing. It's the highest level of self-development within us. It's the idea of self-development. It's our preferable future. That's what we should be moving toward. We should be moving toward becoming wise cyborgs. We can't not be cyborgs. We're all cyborgs already, so we might as well be wise ones. And finally, if we had to have a general idea about an age to be living in the future, we should envision it as an age of wisdom. And we should be teaching wisdom as the central goal in education. That's what we should be doing, because what is education about? Personal development and helping others and helping the world. Well, that's wisdom. Now, in closing, I'm going to go look at this man on a hill. But there's one last point to make. And who is this man standing on this hill? He's Olaf Stapleton. And who is Olaf Stapleton? Olaf Stapleton wrote the most powerful work of imagination ever written. And that's the cover of Star Maker, with the man standing on the hill. And the book opens with the man standing on a hill, looking up at the cosmos. And what Stapleton wrote were cosmic evolutionary narratives heightening future consciousness through science fiction. Although Stapleton was a philosopher, PhD, whose first book was on ethics. But between Last and First Men and Star Maker, he laid out the most colossally vast visions of the future that anybody in the West has ever produced. He went out 50 billion years into the future, including 2 billion years for humans, and then 50 billion years for the collective intelligence of the universe. And he described the purposeful mental, social, ethical evolution of life in the cosmos. And the characters and beings that he described were involved in trying to create preferable futures for themselves. And in reading those books, you get inspirational wisdom narratives of the future and for the future. And in fact, even though science fiction gets stereotyped in lots of ways as being shallow, there's lots of different imaginary ethical science fiction narratives that are actually wisdom narratives. And Stapleton had deep purpose within himself in that he was writing these books to try to inspire and inform people, and his characters had deep purpose, and he was an exemplar of a wise person. The conclusion, futurists need to be wise people. So when I finish with Stapleton, 3 conclusions stand out. My own personal narrative, my ideal personal narrative, my wisdom narrative, I have to connect and anchor it to the ideal personal narrative, not personal, ideal future narrative for humanity. I need to connect the future humanity narrative with a grand cosmic narrative to inform it. That is to say, the way to ground and understand what the good future is to ground it in a evolutionary holistic reality of the cosmos. That's the most realistic and efficacious way to approach the question of ethics. How am I fitting into the big story and helping to facilitate it? And from that, we of course jump to the obvious evolutionary consequence. The good future is the purposeful evolutionary transcendence of us. There's something else coming, and we're going to create it. And that's where the good future lies. And the argument here, just in case the point isn't being strongly made, is that what is best, what is highest, is yet to come. It wasn't at the beginning of time. It isn't orchestrating it. We're creating it. The universe, as us as participants, is creating it. So, in sum, and I'm done in 30 seconds. I started with evolution, I jumped to evolution and evolution, then went to purposeful human evolution, which is an evolution in evolution, threw in the idea of reciprocity, flourishing in the good as the ethics, future consciousness as facilitating flourishing, the virtues in particular of heightened future consciousness. Didn't go through the psychology of it, I skipped that slide. Brought up the importance of the personal narrative for our own self-development, talked a little bit about wisdom and the wisdom narrative, talked a little bit about we all need to be exemplars of wisdom, and at the end said we have to ground our reality in a cosmic evolutionary narrative. And that is the end.